We should be ourselves and we should not try to be Chinese.
Right.
And if we try to be, we will not be as good at it.
Welcome to the gist on Stat News Global. I'm Ramananda Sengupta. Continuing with our series on connectivity with our neighbours, we have one of India's finest diplomats sitting with us today. He served as ambassador to hotspots like Afghanistan, Syria and Myanmar, apart from various other countries and cities. Ambassador Gautam Mukhopadhaya, and I appreciate you taking time out for us.
Sure.
Sir, let's start with a slightly broader thing. We've had the Look East turn into Act East. We've had Neighbourhood First policy, and we have a whole bunch of agreements on paper, BIMSTEC, this tech, that tech. But most people argue that they all seem to be dead in the water simply because the Chinese apparently do things faster than us. How valid is that argument?
Well, I think it depends on case to case. I mean, I think firstly we should acknowledge a degree of difficulty in, in embarking on overseas projects, connectivity projects. One of them being, of course, just political instability. But take for the example of Afghanistan. We managed to do the Zaranj-Delaram road under extreme degrees of difficulty. This was the time that the Taliban were coming back in the, the late 90s. No, sorry, not late 90s. In fact, it was well into the 2000s, around 2007-8. And we still managed to complete it. Of course, that time it was done with the help of the Border Roads Organization. So that was not a normal contract because we knew it was a very difficult contract. In the case of now, if you're specifically talking about Myanmar, when we started the Kaladan project, the Rohingya problem sort of surfaced and again complicated the process. And in the case of the trilateral highway post 2021, we have acute instability in Myanmar, including in the areas through which the project is running.
Right.
So take the example of the Thais. They completed their section of the project of the trilateral highway, but today that highway is virtually unusable, at least for the time being, because there are that highway is being used for military operation. So I think a certain level of difficulty is intrinsic to projects, and the Chinese are also going to be facing it with their CMEC. And they have to exert a lot of efforts to keep it going. Of course, some of it is because they are pipelines. They are not affected in terms of vehicular traffic. But having said that, yes, one could say that there's a performance deficit in our connectivity projects in the neighbor. But I think that's not the only problem. There are other kinds of problems. There's a problem in the overall design. I'm not sure how well in all cases we have taken a holistic view. And let's say we are thinking in terms of connectivity, but whether we have equally invested in things like how we intend to make use of that connectivity. What are the kind of industries that we want to build or tap along the way? What are the kind of commercial kind of activity that we want to do along the way? We seem to think that by establishing connectivity, the job is done.
Right.
But in fact, they require many higher degrees and levels of investment. And that, I don't think we have a good enough mechanism to have that degree of interministerial coordination that may be required for that. And not just interministerial, actually interministerial plus, since the business will be involved, also the business community as such. So that, the business track and the strategic track and the kind of construction track, the connectivity track have to go together.
Right. So now that you mentioned, that we haven't sort of done all our homework in some ways. For instance, I heard that the BBIN, the Bangladesh Bhutan thing, I believe Bhutan suddenly told us that, we can't sign on simply because your trucks will come and, ruin our thing. Why weren't those things discussed before we sort of initiated and announced?
Well, obviously Bhutan went along with that agreement, and then they had second thoughts after.
Okay.
Because they signed up to that agreement. Initially the motor vehicles agreement with Bhutan. Similarly, we negotiate to quite an extent a similar motor vehicles agreement with Myanmar in connection with the trilateral highway. Why Bhutan changed its mind, we know, we can guess. But I think that's a question that is best addressed to the Bhutanese government.
But, did they not bring it up at least once before when we were discussing?
I wasn't privy to the negotiations, so I can't,
So now, if you were to look at, let's come back to China for a second. The argument seems to be that when the Chinese deliver something, they can deliver it overnight. Whereas India, the whole process gets stuck in bureaucracy and other things, and so it's easier for most people. And also, obviously, the Chinese also, bribe the right people in the government and things like that, which we thought. I'm assuming we don't do.
And you're also assuming that the Chinese do.
No, I know that thing. But even in the case of Nepal or, Bangladesh or other places, they all keep saying that India promises a lot. And then when it comes to delivery, for some reason we get stuck because they keep asking us what you need. But on the other hand, somebody in Bangladesh whom I spoke to, they said, look, it's so well developed on your side of the border, but from our side, we haven't yet done things. So it's reciprocal. It has to be done from both sides. What seems to be the main stumbling block here?
So, the Chinese have a way of doing things, and I'm not sure that we should just imitate the Chinese way. And the Chinese are able to do things because they have
the capacity to.
And not just, they are like that. That their system is different from our system. The checks and guards that we have, maybe they don't have. They take a lot of these projects as strategic projects and they invest in it strategically. It is driven from the top by the Communist Party and by the government. And so there is that kind of strategic, you can say, direction and pressure virtually from the top. And then you have these public sector companies who may actually execute it. And, there are lots of kind of inbuilt, you can call it incentives that are built into that sort of thing, which helps them to do it. On the other hand, we have a problem that, we do it as per the book. And the entire tendering process, after all, goes towards an L1 process. And then when there are unforeseen difficulties, then they complicate the budgets, then there are budget overruns. And if then you need, additional budget, there is an entire process that begins with it. So, this is perhaps not the right place to go into how we can remedy that. One, for example, method that I would have thought of, at least I used to think of when I was there, is that for certain projects, certain strategic projects, we amend our tendering process a little to allow for, amongst other things, to allow for, performance on time and to not focus only on cost parameters, but also other performance parameters.
What is your thought if you're looking at Act East and you're able, first you would not focus?
No, I'm not saying that these things are not factored in, but they still don't work. And I just wanted to suggest like one incentive. For example, if you built in that if you complete the project in time at the cost at it was budgeted, let's say you get a 5% bonus or a 2% bonus, depending upon the, that's something to be negotiated. I'm not going fixed on 5%. So then you are building in an incentive for that contractor to finish the work on time.
Absolutely.
Right? Now, there could still be, unforeseen incidents. There could still be, and obviously these things have to be thought through and worked out. And, it's not like the government of India or the Ministry of External Affairs, which does this in this case, does not apply its mind. But obviously, this is a kind of a systemic procedure. And in our system, amending the general financial rules or tweaking it this way or that way is not easy because you have to carry it has to be a consistent and whole of government approach. But this is where you would expect that, let's say, the PMO or the Prime Minister's office or let's say the Cabinet Secretariat could take a kind of strategic decision that, we will treat these overseas projects in a slightly different way.
So what I'm hearing is that we don't necessarily need to emulate the Chinese, but we can do certain tweaks in our policies too.
Correct. And I think we should be ourselves and we should not try to be Chinese.
Right.
And if we try to be, we will not be as good at it.
Right. Sir, our Look East policy changed to Act East. I think our Prime Minister actually announced it from Lapidor in February
2014.
What was the main difference between the Look East and Act East sort of?
Look, again, there can be views and views. One view, which to some extent I share, is that there is a lot of proclamation, there's a lot of sloganeering when we announce these projects, but not necessarily as much content as the slogan. But in this particular case, I think what was trying to be imparted, what I think the government was trying to convey at that stage, partly it's semantic. Look is so passive, act is much more active.
Right.
So you're trying to, and I don't say Look East never meant that you don't act East. I think Look East was also meant to be act East.
Absolutely.
But it was in the context of that time where we were too focused towards the West in general and even towards the West of India in general. And at that time, what had happened was clearly you saw the Iran revolution had changed the situation towards West Asia, where we used to have a lot of labor going. Afghanistan, the Soviet intervention changed the equations. Pakistan itself was extremely disturbed. And East Asia, Southeast Asia was the happening place, was the place that was economically dynamic. You had the emerging economies, you had the tiger economies of that time, and you had a certain model also of economic growth. So Prime Minister Narasimha Rao, saw that as the region of opportunity.
Right.
As opposed to the West, where he saw from West Asia downwards, basically a zone of conflict. Yes. Whereas this was a zone of economic growth. And he says, okay, let's plug into this zone of economic growth. And by no means was it meant to be passive. In fact, it was the original vision. So Act East was supposed to convey this sense of energy and activity. And I think the government did impart a great deal of, sort of attention and motivation. There were other things which distinguish it, I think, from the Look East. One is that within Act East, we factored in much more the cultural commonalities and the cultural roots that we shared with Southeast Asia. Some of that tended towards, what you would call kind of a Hindu golden period and a Hindu kind of nostalgia. I would also say that, so there was this element. There was also a much larger focus on the non-resident Indian or the overseas Indian communities in many of these areas. For example, not many people realize that Myanmar has an OCI community or an NRI community of close to 2 million, that were left over even after the successive waves of emigration that took place first after during the Second World War, then later on after the 60s, and some even after the 1980s. So I think there were ways in which the Act East was distinct from Look East, but part of it was, you can say, nomenclature change. Part of it was, semantic change, signaling, and there was some elements of substance. Even on the business side, I think there was an attempt, at least, to stimulate business activity. In some, if I were to speak only of Myanmar, the changes that we saw were of a kind of nominal or a minimal nature. But then that also had to do with changes in Myanmar that have taken place since that time.
Of course. But the Act East essentially, if you correct me if I'm wrong, involves connecting our northeast via, Bangladesh, Myanmar, and then going down to that.
I think that's a misnomer, Ramanand. A lot of people seem to have bought this idea that Act East is about the northeast. Actually, Act East was about the whole of India.
No, I get that part, but land connectivity would have to be to the northeast.
Yeah. So, a kind of, you can call it, a derivative of that was that, by and large, most trade, the large majority of trade takes place by the sea, because that is the most cost effective. And, you have your eastern seaboard and you have your entire sort of Deccan, coastline. And even now, in terms of trade towards Southeast Asia and East Asia, all covered under Act East. The overwhelming percentage, in fact, I think land-based trade through the Northeast accounts for perhaps 1 or 2%, not more than the overall trade. So I think this tends to be a little exaggerated. But I think one of the outcomes or derivatives of the Act East policy was that it would also stimulate cross-border trade.
Right.
Right? But please remember, while we said that, until about 2016, we still had border trade. Border trade was a limited trade in a certain basket of products up to certain limits and essentially by barter.
Right.
In 2016, I think it was, or 15 or 16, we suddenly switched, actually without much consultation or debate. At least even I as ambassador did not know much about the debates that went on inside it. We suddenly switched from border trade to most favored nation trade.
Oh.
Most favored nation trade is the standard trade kind of pattern, the formula that is used for all country trade. But till today, and my knowledge may be a little dated on this, till today we've actually built an integrated check post in Moreh, which has an immigration office,
Right.
which of course is not at all functional now because of the situation in Myanmar, but also even before that you had COVID. But we still don't have a customs office.
Oh.
Yeah. So, and if you go to the portal, the MHA portal where the Inland Ports Authority portal, which comes under the MHA, and if you see the trade statistics, you will find that there is no import recorded, obviously because there is no customs office. There is, when I last saw it, which was already 2 years back, there was, I think, one trade transaction of an export nature, which was basically some chemical goods which must have come from the industrial heartland, not from the Northeast.
I see.
So this is what I mean. We make these announcements and pronouncements, but we haven't invested on the ground in creating the economies to mobilize and drive that trade. So you would have required an economic policy for the Northeast,
Right.
right? Or an industrial policy or an agro-processing policy. And I would say that if you're looking at these areas, which are largely agri-based, where people live off the land, water, forest, and rivers and ponds, the major investment should be in agri-based industries. And on the other side of the border, in Myanmar, it's exactly the same. Again, they are almost 90% agri-based,
Right.
agricultural, so to say. But if you see our trend of investments, they will be in extractive industries in the Bay of Bengal, let's say Shui gas, or they will be in ports. Adani, for example, had a port. Mostly they will be in the coastline. And mostly they are geared towards so-called, what they call A, extractive industries, and B, being part of global value chains or global transport and communication chains. We haven't really developed a kind of a philosophy of, call it philosophy or a doctrine of external investment, which invests in the local economies in a way that benefits them as well as us and promotes cross-country, cross-border trade. And it is the same economy that extends all the way from the Northeast up to Vietnam,
Right.
right? And it's just the coastal areas that tend to be highly industrialized. The interiors tend to remain more or less the same unless they discover some natural resource. So if there's a natural resource of copper in such and such place, suddenly there'll be massive investment in copper
Right.
or iron ore. We see this everywhere. But so much of this is natural resource driven or global value chain driven. And I think there's a vast area in between where the real economy of the people, what the people are producing, that tends to be ignored. And I would say that if we have to have a holistic vision of look east, act east, and economic growth and investment, and by the way, all these things have a political spin-off.
Of course.
Because if you're going to be investing in the farming economy of a particular country, you're investing in the farmers through their stomachs. Then your relationship is not going to be dependent on political upheavals and ups and downs and parties changing or coming and going. You're going to have a much more stable relationship. But I don't understand why we don't do this.
That, brings me to two separate things that, one of the arguments I heard was that because sea trade is easier to do in many ways, we have actually focused more on that instead of land to begin with, to the extent that we have agencies which deal with the sea part of it. You just have to go through one nodal agency, whereas if you have to do it through land, you have to go through 5 or 6 different agencies. So there's a difference right there. Second, I also heard that, you were mentioning that if we invest and make it important enough for them. I was speaking to somebody who apparently works at Sitwe, and he actually said that, we can hear the firing going on around us, but nobody comes to attack us because both sides know that we are important. So what you said was absolutely right, that, once people know that, look, this is good for us, they themselves will come forward and do that.
So that was also the reason why we were able to execute the Zaranj Delaram project in Afghanistan, because even of course, people were attacked.
Right.
But the locals there helped protect us for the project because they knew that in the end, this is going to benefit them.
Exactly. But sir, given first of all, would you agree that our sort of, land-based connectivity thing is stuck because of the political turmoil right now in Myanmar?
It was stuck even before that.
Well, okay.
And by the way, if you opened up MFN trade and don't have customs office, you are just creating an opening for informal trade and worse. And that's exactly what has been happening.
And the second part of that question, sir, is that even if things were to improve in Myanmar and suddenly you had stability and things like that, would that still be enough for us to actually push through all the initiatives that we are planning to take us all the way out to the Pacific?
So, I have written about this. There's all kinds of tweaking that is required. And I think, the policymakers tend to be a little far away from the ground. But we need much closer, deeper ground level inputs. Even the consultants and the companies with fancy sort of names and so on, who I feel did not do the right kind of work in seeing connectivity along with the local economy and with your economic interests or the opportunities that they provide. For example, Kaladan. Now, Kaladan is built on a river port. By and large, Sitwe has been, through history, and certainly during the British period, has been essentially a coastal port. The ports of Myanmar, the bigger sort of international trading ports, were Rangoon, and then down the line, Maula Main and Dawei, what used to be then called Tavoy, in the British times. The Sitwe port is on the Kaladan River, and it silts all the time. So you cannot have adequate draft. Right. I often see, journalists writing about deep sea port in Sitwe. That just reflects how ignorant they are. Next door at Chofyu, you have one of the best natural harbors in the entire Bay of Bengal. But when we tried for it around, around the turn of the millennium, basically at that time Myanmar was still closed, and we were not given that opportunity to do so. Right? Later on, clearly the Chinese had a lien on it, and the Chinese more or less forced their way. Even then, the Myanmar actually tried to resist going into that port. But now Sitwe port is located on the west of the Arakan range. Right. It doesn't have a great hinterland.
Oh.
No. The hinterland is east of the Arakan in the so-called dry region, Magwe and so on, where the bulk produce is grown in this area, which is the lentils, the beans and pulses and lentils that we import. And for that, there is an established trade route. It goes they don't have to cross the mountain. They go down the river to Rangoon, and then they come to India. So when we did this port, we did provide for a container port. But to me, the container port should have been given priority. Because what is the nature of trade that we are going to have through this port? Is it going to be bulk trade? If it's not going to be bulk trade, and it's going to be goods and merchandise going from Kolkata to Sittwe, and then from Sittwe further up into Burma or into the northeast, then it would appear that A, you should invest in the container port first, number one, and number two, you should invest in certain assemblies or local processing centers so that you can get the benefit of local resources, and to that extent you'll also create employment in that area. So let's say if that place produces palm oil or has oil palm, and you can produce oil palm there, or any number of industries, whatever grows in that area could have been done, but we did not make those investments. Even today we have done the road on the Indian side up to Zorinpui, and now we have begun to some extent started the work on the Myanmar sector. I'm not sure what is the economic thinking behind it. I mean, has anyone done a study about what is the quantum of goods that will go through it? What are the goods that will come and go? Where will they be supplied from? Are the returns worth the investment? I mean, maybe I don't know. I acknowledge that, I've been out of service for the last 8 years, but even on the basis of what I knew when I was in government, I haven't seen those kinds of studies.
Sir, I'm afraid we're running out of time, but I'll ask you one last quick question. Myanmar is just one area.
Sure.
If you go through the
Yeah,
northeast,
absolutely. And you're right to point that
the
out.
whole reason for our connectivity effort is not just trade, it's a whole lot of other things, soft power, increasing all that. Given the political turmoil, not just in Myanmar, but also perhaps in our northeast and other areas, is it worth the effort that we're putting in, or should we continue looking at the sea?
So that again is a good question. You see, one is of course, very often when we've looked at Act East, we've tended to look at Myanmar as the Northeast and Myanmar as transit points,
right,
rather than as destinations by itself. And somehow we think the destination must be, Thailand or the Asia Pacific, Vietnam or something further. And actually maybe we don't even know and we don't realize the biggest trading partner and the trading economy in that area is China. So actually this gateway will become a gateway for China, much more than it will become for Korea, Japan, Thailand, or for that matter for India to go that side, because our industrial areas, the ones that will generate the produce and the products that can be exported on that side, are much more inland or much more towards the coast. So, I'm not sure, again, these things have been well thought out. But your question was whether we should forget this. Now, my point is this, that one problem is that once you've made large investments, you can't waste them, right?
So but it will be like throwing good money after that.
So you tend to sort of go, and then you've set targets. And the Modi government, let's say, the government is a very action-oriented government, has set targets. Then regardless of the change in the ground situation, we are trapped in that target-seeking missile. We have to get that target. I think, this is my judgment, I think Myanmar will be unstable for a long time. And I think it will be not easy to actually operationalize these two projects for a long time to come. In fact, I don't even think you can do work on major parts of this project right now. And again, I think we should have the maturity, and I would say, maturity and the decision-making capability of taking a strategic pause, of saying, all right, look, we are not going to waste this. We are going to return to this project once things stabilize. But why do it under conditions of instability?
Absolutely.
Now, sometimes you go into a different logic. You say, no, we have to show our political will. They should not think that we have given up on the country, So all these factors do play a role, and I won't say there are easy answers. But I would have said that at this point of time, and we don't know what kind of Myanmar there will be tomorrow, whether we'll be dealing with the same government.
Right.
When we started Kaladan project, our deal was with the military government of that time. That later on turned into a civilian military kind of cohabitation. And they were fine with it. But the locals who were the Rakhine, they were very suspicious of a project that has been signed up with the junta. And they saw all kinds of ulterior motives. They feared securitization of that entire multimodal project. And initially, once Myanmar opened up, after the elections in 2015 and 16, we had to face a lot of skepticism and criticism from the locals who were suspicious because it was a project that was undertaken at the time of the military government. And they doubted the sincerity of the military government in this. But gradually, as you said, they themselves realized that this is for their benefit. And we always thought, look, when we did Kaladan project, we knew that the Kaladan project may not be used for some time because it was a strategic project. It was an alternative route to the northeast in case Bangladesh was not available and in case there was some problem on the, the Siliguri corridor. So it was a kind of insurance project of sorts. But you also knew that even while that happens, it has trade potential. And in the process of constructing the road, you will also deliver development benefits, both to Mizoram and perhaps to the northeast in general, but also to Chin Hills and to Rakhine State. And gradually they understood that, and their suspicions evaporated. And today I'm sure the Rakhine people, even the Arakan army, which is now, dominant there and challenging the military very strongly, will acknowledge that, we have entered this project in good faith, even if the dividends will take some time. So will they be happy if we continue to deal with the junta while they're actually on the ground? And can you just switch and dump the junta today and start dealing with the Arakan army overnight? You can't. So, all right, you have to negotiate your way around it. Maybe you do, under the radar, you deal with these people. Over the radar, you talk to the junta. Or maybe you say, all right, let's take a pause, let the situation clarify. We remain committed and we can take it up again.
That's not. So I'm afraid we must end this interview there. Thank you so much, Ambassador, for your deep insights into the whole issue here. And I look forward to having you with us again.
Sure.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Bye.
Thanks. That was Ambassador Gautam Mukhopadhaya sharing his insights with us on the challenges and opportunities that face our Act East, Neighbourhood First, all these policies, particularly vis-a-vis Myanmar. I do hope you enjoyed this particular episode of The Gist, and I look forward to having you with us again. Till then, this is Ramananda Sengupta signing out.